Good morning, folks. This is Terry Trueblood, Chair of Trustees for the Illinois Fraternal Order of Police. And today on our Facts Matters show, we have with us Sol Ennis. You're going to have to help me with that last.
Isaac.
There, perfect. See, I knew
That's
you
it.
I would. All right. And you're a certified domestic violence
Professional.
Okay, great. And we're going to talk about some of the effects of the former House Bill 3653. It's now a public act. Governor signed it into effect. And police and all of your folks interact pretty regularly out on the street with domestic violence issues. And for police, we teach them right from the get-go in academy. It's one of the most dangerous things you can go into. And clearly, a lot of the professionals are being asked to accompany police. A lot of times they've been going on their own, obviously, for years. But this is a serious situation. So I'll let you kind of introduce yourself anymore, and then kind of we'll jump into the topic matter so people can follow what we're talking about.
Sure. And Terry, I want to thank you so much for this opportunity. And what I would like to say is, just before I even get started, for all of the police officers out there, the sheriffs, everyone who helps us make sure that victims are safe, families are safer, and helping us making sure to help communities and families and individuals in domestic violence, just our hats are off to you. We understand the importance of your work and we honor your work and thank you. Yeah, so, yes, I'm a certified domestic violence professional. I also have worked in shelters where domestic violence victims come to when they are fleeing domestic violence. We've had men in the shelters, we've had women, children, of course. And I've been a teacher, a facilitator for partner abuse intervention programs. So I have worked with people who have been abused and people who are being abusive. So my heart goes out to all of these people, okay, because they're all experiencing some type of trauma.
Absolutely. We see it every day. You see it every day. And I think that is, I think, as we've talked that, some of the disconnect is we do see it, you do see it, but some of the policymakers do not see it, and until I always say, until something crawls right up on your doorstep and you go, how'd this get here? That's really when the reality hits. So as it relates to this new public act, what major concerns do you guys have that hopefully we can help address?
Okay. Well, what I will say too is whenever you hear about this act in the news, the first thing that comes up is the bail, right? Bail, bond, that type of stuff. And there's so much more to the act, but let's address that first.
Sure.
Okay. Now, one of the things that I initially thought, the moment I saw this, is a knee-jerk reaction. I'm like, oh my goodness, what do you mean that, you're going to remove the bail? And so now, of course, there's a fairness element to that for people who can afford to get out of jail and people who can't afford just sitting there. I don't want that any more than the next person who cares about people does. However, when I thought about abuser typologies, I was also thinking like, okay, so now you're going to remove possibly one of the deterrents.
Yeah, because there's a whole science behind this that people need to understand. People have studied and studied and studied and looked at many case studies to develop what you're talking about, and that is one of the deterrents. Correct?
It is.
Yes.
Right. And so when we think about the person who actually needs to be separated from the family, who actually needs anything that you can put in that person's way to give them some time to think, to give them some time to get into some other type of educational programming, so they can kind of slow down, get away from that obsessive violence, compulsion. All of those things can be quite helpful. Just looking at it through that very narrow lens. Okay. Now, of course, there's a wider issue that's at stake and at play there that needs to be addressed. But my immediate thought when I heard about that was like, okay, now what is going to happen with this whole catch and release kind of situation?
Yeah, that's his problem. No more than we get somebody to a facility, a lockup facility of some sort, we process them with paperwork and then out the door, right back potentially into the household that they're causing problems with to render it worse than it was before. And I think that's what we're all concerned about.
Right. Same here. And then I was also thinking about, Terry, even if the person doesn't go back to the home where there's, what about the 72-hour rule with that? Does that still apply?
That's a good question.
Okay.
100
Okay.
pages. I haven't had a chance to read all of them. I'm trying to get through it, a little bit at a time, but trying to hit the highlights. But I'm not 100% sure on that one.
Yeah, and it's not easy. It's not easy reading. I mean, that's some difficult reading there. Those sentence structures. I mean,
it's not.
You
not
need your
all.
Wheaties for those.
Yes, absolutely.
So, okay. So what the other thing that I was concerned about was this. Okay, so by the time someone becomes like abusive to the point where the police are being called, they have other problematic relationships in the family. They've also become pretty stubborn in some instances. So even if I don't go back to the house where my wife and kids are, or my husband and kids are, I end up going to my elderly parents' home.
Right.
Okay, now I'm a problem there.
Yes.
Okay. And even if I'm there and I'm not being abusive necessarily, I'm still bringing all of those problems, that energy with me.
Yes.
And so just the ripple effect of these types of situations where people don't have anywhere to go, they haven't quite calmed down yet. And then the message that's been sent out that, the consequences have been decreased.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
It emboldens criminals.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
They'll learn this very quickly, probably quicker than we will. Well, I can go in and, beat the heck out of my wife, and they take me and write my name down, let me go. I come back and make it worse. And you're right. Sometimes they'll have to go to other family members because there's no other place for them to go. And, alcohol, drugs, all those typical things, mental disorders, those are all things that we all have to you all deal with it. And certainly the police do. Although, like I have said before, parents have had the kids for 18 years or more and wasn't resolved. Teachers had them 7-8 hours a day and wasn't resolved, but the police get there for that 5 minutes and we're supposed to do some kind of psychological Band-Aid or first aid on them and fix it all. And now we're going to be partnering with a lot of folks in your profession. It looks like that's the reimagining system. And maybe that'll work, maybe it won't, but I certainly do believe that, some violence could come from unarmed professionals trying to do their jobs. And sometimes that's not the right location to sit and try to psychologically evaluate somebody. Plus, they don't want to listen. They're not there to listen. You can lead a horse to water, as you know, in mental health. That doesn't mean they're going to drink. They got to want to get better. And that's not necessarily the case when they're in the heat of the moment, under the influence of whatever, so I'll let you take off on that because you're doing it every day.
Yeah. And Terry, I'm so glad you mentioned substance abuse, because I think it was like out of all of the cases that we've seen, 60 to 75% of them, a substance was involved. Yes. Namely alcohol. Okay. And so even once that wears off, they're still under the influence of a powerful emotion.
Yes.
I'm feeling angry. I'm feeling rejected. I feel like everybody's turned their back on me. Okay. And so now you have to make sure that person is emotionally stable enough so that they can hear, because some instances they can't hear because they've got all this going on.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I'm glad you brought that up because I know from a police perspective, when we get there, they are not listening to anybody by the time we get there. They've already went through all of those phases before we ever get the 911 call and have to show up. They're not listening. And so it becomes a point of, you can try your psychological first aid, so to speak, right there. But, and people do, we try to talk them down and all that. Nobody wants to have to take them to jail. It's a lot of paperwork. And plus it's not really effective. They need to be in a facility or with a counselor that can actually help them. At least know that, but we have little choice in the matter, as that respect. So, this is problematic. There's no doubt about it.
Right. And Terry, I'm glad you mentioned that too, because when we look at the research, now for some people, once the police are called, they're like, okay, wait a minute, they snap out of it. Other people, once they get arrested, they snap out of it. Then there are others. Time and time again, nothing deters these people in terms of, being arrested or what have you. So it's like, okay, now how do we reason with you? Which program do you need? But in the meantime, we must keep the family and the community safe, because you're out of control right now.
That's right. And that's part of our job, to keep the community safe. Mm-hmm. And, there's a lot of facets to that, whether that's the fireman putting out the fire, taking the guy in who's beating his wife, or, the drunk on the street who's poking tires with a knife. I mean, there's a lot of aspects to public safety, and it takes a lot of tools and a lot of people. Now, I saw where the governor made some mention that we were going to get funding for some of this. I've never seen it. I don't know where you guys are at, if you got funding coming in or you don't, or if that's all smoke and mirrors.
Well, in terms of funding, I really cannot speak on that particular issue because a lot of the work that I'm involved in is educating professionals.
Right.
And so I haven't necessarily seen those budgets, but I will say that even before the bill was enacted, there was always a challenge there just to do the things that we were doing before. Okay. Right. And so now who knows what that will look like, how that will play out in the end. I'm not quite sure either.
Right. Well, we're looking, obviously, this classic term, defund the police, and the many ramifications that's got is incredible. People think of, just a policeman in a squad car. Well, what about the detective that's doing homicides? What about the people that are, doing rapes and burglaries and these sorts of things? Those things are going to go to the wayside if you don't have enough people. And I think they wanted to transfer that money to who knows where, but I think mental health was one of the areas. From a police perspective, if we had places to take people that would be helpful to them, and that was an option, that would probably be great, because, sitting somebody who's mentally ill in a jail cell, other than the cooling off period, which has now been, as you said, removed for all practical purposes because of the bail, catch and release kind of situation, we don't have a lot of options. And that's not something the police did. It's just the way society evolved over time.
Yeah. And Terry, one place where I've gotten a lot of really good research about community policing, and then also community measures to prevent domestic violence, is from the National Network for Safe Communities.
Okay.
They've done a lot of really great research. And what they also do is evaluate programs at that level. So to see how effective they are, and looking at, was there any type of meaningful statistical difference between, before this program began and after it became, active. And so there are many different types of solutions out there. And I think that in terms of being an advocate, what we're really interested in is prevention first, then intervention. But we're always hoping to make sure that we can keep families safe. That means everybody in the family, the abusive person and the person who's being abused.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. When everybody come away as a winner, the challenge with the reality is that's a tall order.
It is a tall order.
The tall order. And with limited resources, that's getting taller as it goes. And people are really stressed with the COVID that's been going on, very stressed, all of them piled in at home. Very stressed, loss of jobs, another stressor. So these things really start to pile up very quickly. Maybe it'll alleviate itself a bit once the majority have a little herd immunity, so to speak. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. And so Terry, what I have another question for you though too.
Sure.
In terms of when you have a situation where a person has been arrested and they have to report to work. And so one of the things that people are concerned about, like, okay, well, listen, the reason why we didn't want to keep people incarcerated, just waiting, is because, people are being removed from the home, that income is being removed from the home. And, that's unfair to the family, right? Okay. So what do you think would be a good solution in situations like that?
Well, I think that runs into the judicial branch. Law enforcement itself, we're going to drop them off and file the report like we're supposed to. At that point, evaluations have to take place as to whether this person can actually do that in a safe fashion. All you wouldn't want to do is release one of those folks and they go into the factory and start shooting everybody up. And then they're going to come back and say, hey, why'd you release this person? They had just done a serious domestic violence situation the day before and you let them go. And now they went and killed multiple people. That's the terrible scenario that could happen. Hopefully, in most cases, that wouldn't. As long as they've been evaluated. Now, obviously, that's just going to be, as they say, a down and dirty evaluation, so to speak, of whether this person can or cannot function. So that'll be a judgment call by a professional, in the mental health or in your profession. And then a judge is going to have to say, yeah, I agree with that. So, they've been in jail for a day or two. We got to get them back to work. Here's the ankle bracelet, that kind of thing.
Right.
let them go. But then we don't have enough people to actually go to the job to see if they're actually going. There's GPSs on there, but we don't have enough people to even scan that on the computer to see if they're going with it. And if they're not, depending on what county of the 102 different counties, there's going to be a different reaction. In Cook County, it's going to be a completely different reaction than you go all the way down to Alexander County, down along the Ohio, Mississippi area, So it's a problematic issue, no question about it. I mean, we would certainly like people out making a living, paying taxes and doing what the rest of us are doing. But it's a balance between that and public safety. So.
Yeah. And Terry, I can appreciate what you said. And one of my mentors in the field, her name is Amira Abu Youssef, and she said, Sol, things can be so different from county to county. And you really have to look at the socioeconomic factors, the demographics, all of that. That's a very complicated answer and question, right?
Right. Exactly. I worked for a statewide law enforcement agency. So we would get a lot of folks that would transfer out of the Chicago area down south, and they would say, holy cow, this is a whole different world. It's just like night and day difference. And we had big, large districts, and the way they would operate in one district is a lot different than they would do in other more southern districts. That's where some of the stuff that got through seemed to be targeted primarily at Cook County and maybe the suburbs around to some degree, but the issues in Cook County, but that affects all the other 101 counties when they make it a state law rather than trying to deal with that particular county and their issues. Because it is a big difference. The whole entire cultural, basis is different from county to county and region to region. And we need to take that into consideration because, to get a domestic violence expert in Southern Illinois, I mean, we may be waiting for hours and hours before somebody can drive 3 counties over to be there because they're sparsely, like DCFS type folks and that thing. You're literally sitting with somebody half the night before you can get somebody there. And it's a real challenge.
Yes. And Terry, this is just a really short statement that I had read that the Illinois Coalition Against Domestic Violence said in response to the bill, we believe the courts should be utilizing appropriate risk assessment tools with each detainee to determine whether to release, hold, or set bond conditions.
Absolutely. That's kind of what I just kind of said. I agree with that. That's exactly what should happen. There shouldn't be a blanket thing one way or the other. It just can't be because some people it's a one night deal that they're perfectly fine the next day. And they do need counseling very likely, but it's a real challenge. No question about it. But we in this state tend to take a big swipe at all of it in one fell swoop. So
Absolutely. And so one of the things that I'm always concerned about, and I've heard many lawmakers say this, does the judge have any type of discretion? It's almost impossible to assess dangerousness sometimes. Okay, we can assess lethality in many instances based on someone's previous history. However, in this moment, where are they in their cycle?
Right.
Okay. And so, I mean, all of those things come into question when we think about, what do we need to do with each individual case of violence?
Yeah, absolutely. And if there's mental disorders, the sometimes misdiagnosis of mental disorders, what's a bipolar situation is not really a bipolar situation, that kind of thing, that can be a real challenge. And if the judge is looking at papers saying they have this, well, that's all they can really base it on unless some new evidence comes forward. So I think it is a real challenge for the judges to actually make that assessment. But the way the law works, that seems to be that's where it needs to be. And the rest of us are, in the process. That's all we're doing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So if you were to wave a magic wand and you get to alter this law, especially as it relates to the cash bail or the lack of it, what would you guys want to see happen there?
Okay, I can speak as one lone domestic violence advocate. What I would really like to see, if there was like a division on a huge scale with these, county jails, if there was something like a halfway house section. So if there is someone, first anybody, in terms of it, if you're rich, if you're poor, you've committed a crime, Okay, you must repair this situation. You're going to need some education in terms of figuring out how to resolve conflict peacefully. But we still want you to go to work. We still want you to, be able to benefit and also contribute to your community. But you're going to be here with us at night.
Exactly.
Okay, until the family figures out, okay, now what's the best place, what's the best living situation for all of us so that we can all stay safe. You get what you need, the community gets what it needs, and then but you're also able to go to work and, be a human person without losing everything, and without your family losing everything.
Sure.
So if I had a magic wand, it would be something along those lines.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, that sounds good. I mean, I wish there was more facilities that were appropriate. I mean, granted, if they committed a crime, they're going to have some repercussion, and this tends to take that away. But there's got to be some repercussions that evening for the crime, that night, the next day, till you get in front of a judge. That's just the way it is. Don't do the crime. You don't have to do the time. That's, an old adage. There's some truth to that. And so I think people need to definitely be, put into a facility to get detoxed to some degree, to get their senses about them, that cooling off period, if you will. And then once sobered up to the level that they could sit in front of a judge and the judge could look at their history, because that's going to take, but remember, it's going to take a ton of manpower, a lot of state's attorneys information, a lot of additional police, and certainly domestic violence folks to come up with the paperwork all of a sudden instantaneously within 24 hours or 48 hours to get in front of a judge. That's going to take, and there's got to be money for this. I mean, yes. A lot of these ideas are great, I suppose, in certain ways. A lot of them are going about it back asswards, as I would say down south. But there's a lot of money that's got to be flooded into it. And I didn't see that in the bill. I don't know if you did, but I certainly didn't see money coming in to help us.
Right. And I would have loved to have seen a bill that was like, okay, so what we're going to do, we're seeing here's the need, here's the issue, and we're going to start putting some money toward the solutions for that issue. Yeah. And this is how we're going to redirect the bill money. Right.
That would be good. And of course, everybody's got their hand out for something. They've all got their projects that are critical to them. I understand the balancing act, but this is pretty challenging. It's almost like doing a tightrope without a net. If people fall, it's going to be bad, and we don't want that to happen. We've got to have some protections put in there. So, yeah, I think we're on the same track here as it relates to trying to keep the community safe. We interact with your folks all the time, and vice versa. And we all have the same issues here. We got to get people off the street that are a danger to themselves and others. This law doesn't appear to me to do that very effectively, if at all. And they'll get right back into the game and make it that much worse. And boy, I hate to see that, because somebody's going to suffer, and I don't want to be the one sacrificing a family member in that situation. And nobody wants to be that. But I think that's going to happen as statistics start to roll in. These people, we know human nature, they tend to roll right back into their ways unless there's an intervention, and they'll cause the problem. And I don't know where the disconnect is, other than some of the policymakers don't actually put the rubber to the road like you do, I do, and people in our professions. We actually have to engage these human beings that are cognitively challenged often through whatever means, whether it's drugs or just actually mental illness and so forth, and try to have a conversation, try to get them right. And the policymakers oftentimes have not had that experience. So the realities are far, far away from what this law appears to portray.
And Terry, you know what? A lot of the people that I've come into contact with who have been abusive, their only impairment was something that was, temporary, because maybe they were intoxicated. And there were many people who were sober when they did what they did. But my point of saying that is this: people don't always understand how to resolve conflict, and they don't know how to deal with the feelings that are caused when conflict is happening. And so they end up responding physically, verbally, in an abusive manner. If they can have that intervention like you were talking about, and that's a large majority of it. So many people, it's very few people who I've seen who have been abusive who are actually, either had some type of cognitive illness of some kind that was longstanding or chronic. these are just regular old people who are getting into fights with their loved ones and do not know how to de-escalate.
That's
for
right.
the most part.
Right.
Right.
And, you know, that de-escalation is a little word they're throwing around a lot. Police officers have been taught de-escalation for years, decades, in fact, various de-escalation techniques, because, you know, everything from what we call verbal judo, that's out there, so that we can try to calm things down. So I know they want us to get more training in it, but I will say that you get a lot of experience in verbal judo when you're out there through year after year. And of course you get it in the academy and you get it in services already. You know, it's just like the chokeholds. They said they wanted us to get rid of the chokeholds. Well, we did in 2015. We're just redoing it again. The FOP was big in removing the chokeholds because we've never used them. We knew science wise, it wasn't the best way to go. So there's a lot of repetition in this bill as I see it, and that we've already addressed. But since we were left completely out of the mix, and I assume you guys were too, it was just handed down upon us. And we knew something was coming, but it was a bit of a mystery. And we couldn't get a handle on a lot of it. We certainly weren't involved. I don't care what anybody says. I remember one of the players that tends to be in a lot of the police conferences, you know, he went to one, but they had him muted. He couldn't talk. So, you know, and even this task force they've got coming up, taking away qualified immunity for police. We got one person, I think there's like a dozen more or something, a large number of other folks that have nothing to do with law enforcement, going to make that decision of whether qualified immunity goes away or stays. And I don't know how you're going to keep people in the profession. It's just, you'd be a fool to work in it, in my opinion. So, but it is what it is right now. So we'll hope calmer minds and, you know, people reflect on this and start to clean some of that up, because you can't throw a 700+ page bill in the wee hours, a half an hour before the General Assembly gets out of office and expect that to be right. You know, there's going to be all kinds of cleanup that needs to take place.
And for some places that have had similar bills in place, like New York, New Jersey, Texas, a year later, they do talk about like, okay, well, wait a minute, you know, we need to go back and amend a few things, right? Right. And so I think Governor Cuomo, he had said something, not in the too recent past, okay, but he had said something like, okay, you know what, we do need to go back and tweak this because we're seeing that maybe this wasn't the best decision.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And we should learn from that because it's already been tried in other states and it's not been very effective. And, you know, well, the people will scream. I mean, that's what's going to happen. It'll be your citizens out there screaming, hey, this is not working. And then the politicians are going to have to react. That's the nature of it. So, but, you know, I think this was an extremely interesting topic. I think that for our police officers that are listening and the citizens that would be listening, I think they learned a lot today. I really do. And I really appreciate you all coming on and explaining from your perspective, you know, how all this, you know, is going to lay out and what we think the crystal ball is showing us, you know, for the future.
Yeah. And Terry, I mean, I just hope the best for our state and of course, all the citizens here, and that, you know, whatever we do, even if we, you know, going through this and figuring out, okay, now what's the damages here? But, you know, just making sure we get right back in there with some solutions and just keep trying to do things in a better way.
Yeah, the world's not over. We got time to change some things before a lot of it is implemented. Not a lot of time, but we've got some time. You know, and so we'll all try together to do that. If everybody would just calm down, relax a little bit, take a big deep breath, they're going to find out they have a whole lot more in common than they have, you know, apart from one another. So I hope that is actually what happens. So anyway, well, thanks for being on, and for the listeners out there, this is another Facts Matters Moments. So we'll see you next time. Thank you.